Welcome to Kettlebell Corner, where strength meets theory, where we join you for a deeper dive into all things kettlebell. I'm Jeremiah Waylon, and of course, that's Roger T. Sipper Parks. And let's get into it. All right. We saw some things on the internet, and we want to kind of help frame things a little bit for you. And particularly, I sent a post to Roger that talked about not leaning back in a kettlebell swing. And it kind of falls in line with the do this, don't do that, and you should do this category. And really, how do you even know what to believe when you see stuff on the internet? Is this right? This guy had a lot of followers. Do we believe him? Or was he coaching, like you talked about earlier, by shape? So first, Roger, hi.
Hello.
What does coaching by shape even mean? So we can put some context into this.
Coaching by shape references the idea of similarity. So one thing that people are tired of me talking about, the idea that a swing is a hinge. Okay. The backswing has the same shape buried in it as a hinge. Therefore, they assume that this is similar to that. And in the process, they get a lot of things wrong and they skip some steps in coaching. Coaching by shape assumes that if you end up in a particular position, or if you are in a particular position, it assumes a certain subset of things that happen. But what coaching by shape neglects is the sequence. It neglects the sensations that one feels. So if we go specifically into this example, we're looking at the idea that the assumption is if you were in this shape, if you're leaning back, it presupposes or assumes that you were leaning back by arching your spine, which doesn't need to be the case. It also assumes that you got to that shape or that position in a particular way, which isn't necessarily going to be the case either. Now, forget about the fact that not leaning back through the swing, this whole piece of advice is fundamentally wrong, and we'll talk about why. But coaching by shape is very, very Sesame Street.
Rudimentary.
It is. It's
literally Sesame Street.
It's
Yeah.
It's like, which one of these things is not like the other? Was that a?
Yeah, I think so. It's been a while since I have had Sesame Street on, but yeah, that sounds right.
So we don't want to just look at shapes. We need to ask a deeper question about sequencing, about forces, about how did this get to this position in order to have an intelligent conversation, which is harder. It's not as easy to do, but in this situation, this is a classic example of causation and correlation not necessarily being the same thing. And in this case, it may not be. You may end up leaning in a swing, but the underlying assumption that you're over relying on your lower back and you're going to hurt yourself is not necessarily the case. Okay, so just because you do see a lean during a swing, it doesn't mean that you've used your back, and it doesn't mean that you're going to hurt yourself necessarily. Now, it's a clue. It's something, hey, let me pay attention to this. If I see an arch in the back, let me look closer. But causation is not the same as correlation is not the same as causation. So you need to ask some more questions before you dig deeper, which I think really raises a question is, what questions do you ask? How do you know? And who or what do you believe on the internet to begin with?
Yeah, I don't know if I believe anything these days, but I believe you, Roger. And, when we take this approach to coaching and we frame it in a principle-based method, it's pretty easy to allow some grounded roots, so to speak, in what you're doing. So you know why this is happening because you started here to get the certain desired effect. And we talked about principle number one, and it's apropos. What moves first matters, using sequencing as our guide. Can you elaborate on that and why really is that number one when it comes to this kettlebell stuff?
Which is what we have chosen to do, if we coach based on physics first, and we think about forces and what's generating these forces, where are these forces coming from, then we can make some assumptions based on what we see. So we have some evidence. Now, There are more scientific ways to do this, but we don't work, nor do we have all of our clients work in an exercise lab. So we've got to make some assumptions that might sometimes be incorrect, which is why we also follow this up with a subjective process of how did that feel? But that we can get to later. If something moved first, we're using contact force to move the bell, and contact force is going to work in a particular sequence. So, for example, the situation we have is a swing. So let's just limit that context. If we're looking at a swing and we see first thing, let's go slow motion in our mind. Someone's in that backswing. They've got the kettlebell, nice deep hike, everything, that nice hike position. Everything looks solid. Then we let the frame roll and we start to see things happening. The first thing we see at that point is a head that's jerking up. If we see a chest lifting, if we see a tailbone lifting, if we see a deep arch, or if we see even the arms coming away from the body, if we see the bell already moving up into the float position, but the knees and the hips are not extended, they're not straight, then something else needed to contribute to that motion. It's not solely the motion of the legs. Now, that doesn't mean the legs don't work at all. It just means
they're
that
just
something
not the main
else,
driver.
They may be the main driver, but they should be the only driver.
Ah, yes, that's key right there. I think that's missed. It's the only driver, and then the rest happens after they've finished their job. Is that correct in thinking?
Yeah, you basically you have your leg drive, which pushes the feet into the floor. You get a ground reaction force. The force coming up as your joints rotate, they bring, via the lower leg bones, the femurs, they make your pelvis spin, so to speak. They make your pelvis go from a position behind your heel to a position in front of the heel and over the foot. Because the spine attaches to the pelvis, if you can keep that spine stiff, as the pelvis comes up and forward, the spine goes along for the ride. The torso is going to help push your arms where they're glued to the front of your body. It's going to help push that bell forward because your arms are attached to your body at the shoulders. The shoulder joints are going to pull the bell along as the top of the torso rotates forward. And then once you have finished standing, your mass is solid. All that momentum is going to transfer into the bell. So the leg should be the thing. It's not the only place where there is force happening, but is the driver of the skill. And once you are in that vertical plank, that's when your arms should separate. So if your arms separate before that point, something needs to separate them. Something needs to be moving them, which means that it is either going to be, it's got to be something between your body and the bell. Yeah. And if it's not everything below the waist, it's got to be some portion of above the waist. And when we look at the linkage, it's got to be either the arms or the spine. I guess you could use your wrists in some kind of weird maneuver, but
flip matter.
Sure. But let's call it arms and spine. And that is just kind of simple physics and common sense. So what we're looking at in this situation with the what moves first is that if you see motion that is preceding other motion, okay, and that motion is not from the legs, which is what we really want it to be exclusively, then we know something else is working. Is it the end of the world? Maybe, maybe not. That's another question to decide. I've had new students where I've seen this isn't quite right, but I'm not worried about, this student hurting him or herself. So I'm going to let this go. I'm going to offer the correction after a couple reps because, you don't want to overwhelm people.
Which is easy to do.
It is. It is. So normally,
command to that command.
What I'm going to do too is I'm not even going to correct it. I'm going to have them put the bell down, and then I'm going to give them a drill where they can experience the thing that I want them to experience. We've got one that we like called the arms down jumps, and that's really good at making sure that the arms stayed glued to the body while you're driving your legs down into the floor. And it's pretty simple. You keep your arms in that position and you jump, and you don't move your arms. That's it.
Just do it like 3 to 5 times. It's pretty simple. You just hold your arms and then push them back behind you when you land, and don't use them to help your jump. There you go, everybody.
That's it.
Try that. If you're a coach, this is going to change your world right there. If you're somebody who's learning at home, listening to this, then that's going to also pretty much help you out if you can't quite grasp that concept. And, we originally said, the lean back is, well, we didn't say it, but the post said that the lean back is the problem. And we've discussed before, and I presume we're going to do it right now, that the lean back is actually not a problem. You do want to have a lean back, or you can have a lean back, and it just depends from where. Where is that lean back happening? So when is it the right lean back, if that is even a thing?
One more thing that I want to talk about before we get into this is this idea of what you should and should not believe. So
okay, don't tell me what to do.
It can be difficult. This is a social problem. This is the world's problem right now. We have so much content out there coming from so many different places. Many people, I think, are well-meaning. They took their certification and they read their manuals, and they say, that here's the checklist. And it's this idea of, I'm going to teach you to swing in 2 minutes. No, you're not. That's at least 10. that's not a thing. That's not going to happen. People don't realize that when you get your certification, any certification, it's your entrance into this field. It's not your black belt. It's your white belt. Okay. This is you beginning the process of becoming a good coach. It's all the certification says, and it's really important. And you don't even need a certification. It's all about the right attitude. But the things that you should look for is your quick checklists, unless you're getting it to be a very, very narrow topic. If someone says, hey, on the way down from the kettlebell hardstyle snatch, make sure that your arm is connected to your body before you move into the backswing. Be aggressive with your hips into the backswing. Stay balanced. Those are all checklists, and that would be fine. But they're also referencing the thing that's most important. It's telling you what will happen if you do these behaviors, and you can come up with a rationale as to why. But it's not just you should do this, you should do that. It's not this whole black and white binary, this is the only way. And it really does come down to, is someone offering you a principle-based approach, and that is, can I use this information in another context?
Yeah. Like, can you carry this over? And just like you said at the beginning, you're like, let's talk about this in the context of a swing. However, what we just described in the principle number one in this discussion is applicable to the clean, to the snatch, which are basically the ballistic lifts that are starting more or less from the ground, or that hinge to hike position. And even so, it's going to work in the jerk. So it does carry over. So it does carry weight, as opposed to just do this, don't do that because I said so and I have 30,000 followers.
Sure. And I'll even raise you that principle is applicable to all movement. As you know, I have quite a few older clients who have had surgeries, injuries, things like that. I deal with a lot of people who have back pain, knee pain, whatever. And this principle has served me very well. For a long time, I couldn't figure out, why are you feeling your back so much when you're squatting? Part of it is position, and part of it is the engine. Part of it's what you're using. So this is a principle that will carry over, and this is the stuff you're looking after. You can get into the idea. You can get into the idea of resume. Okay. Oh, I've been coaching kettlebells for X amount of time. There are some coaches who've been coaching kettlebells for a long time who I wish would stop coaching kettlebells. I know that sounds disrespectful, but I also don't care.
But you also didn't name them, so they know who they are.
I really don't think they do. But I really don't think they do.
That's for another time.
But just because you've been doing it for a long time doesn't mean you've been doing it well for a long time. If you've been a coach for 20 years and you've never said anything smart, I'm not impressed. I do think experience matters.
Yeah, experience does, and you do need to evolve your thinking as things come along.
Sure.
So we were basically self-taught. I will say that, and then we did a certification, which was our white belt, and that didn't stop the desire to learn more about it. Subsequently, taking that deeper dive into physics and beginning to try to understand that and apply it and make these principles sound.
And this is even part of that process, selfishly.
Yeah. Yeah.
You realize when you put it, when you put out a podcast, or you do something like write a book, you're going to subject yourself to nastiness. You're going to stress test your ideas. So cool. I'm continuing that process. But it really comes down to avoid the short checklists, avoid the binary do this, don't do that, and look for principles behind the advice. Also look for justification. And if you don't have justification, then ask. There are a lot of things that I don't put in a post because I've learned a long time ago people don't care. Most people don't care. And if you're the one out of 1,000 that cares, ask me.
Yeah. And so that being said, when is it appropriate to lean back, or what does that look like to lean back? Because if that's the coaching advice you got, stop leaning back, just form a hard plank and brace like you're about to be run over by a truck. Okay. But we say it's okay to lean back where?
You should be leaning back through the ankles. And this is the rationale. No one is suggesting, I'm not suggesting, you're not suggesting that we lean back through the spine and we arch the spine. We're also not suggesting that you move the bell with the spine. What we are saying is that the idea of leaning back is not just appropriate, but it's healthy, and it is required for maximum force transfer from the floor into the bell. So this is what I mean. If you kind of do that whole 30,000 foot view, and you are saying a ballistic lift in its very broad strokes form is a manner of or is an exercise in changing your shape and coming closer to the floor, and then extending, so flexion and extension, in order to get a kettlebell to be ballistic, then we need to understand that the shape that we change as we go into a swing is one where the knees need to come forward to some degree. They have to. You have to move at the knee, at the hip, and at the ankle. You have to do it. If you have a completely vertical shin, you will fall and you will miss out on force production. This is one of the reasons why Strong First has changed from this completely, spine parallel to the floor like some of the old swings to a more 45-degree angle, because you need
the athletic hinge.
Sure. You need a combination of vertical and horizontal. So let's start there. You bend in a particular way to get into the backswing position or to begin a swing. The second thing we need to realize, this goes back to another principle, is that force production requires distance. So if you think about, you've got the fastest car in the world, right? What's a really fast, you see in the commercial, 0 to 60 in how many seconds?
Well, I guess, they used to say 3, but I think you can do some electric cars out there will go a lot faster.
Okay, so let's say
named after physicists or scientists, I'll say that.
Let's say you have half a second. That's all you have. And your car takes 3 seconds to get up to a particular speed. When you look at time and distance, it's kind of the same thing in this scenario. You need distance in order to generate force. You have to have it. Doesn't matter how strong you are. If you think back to Bruce Lee and that whole 2-inch punch, that's why it's impressive, because he didn't have distance. Yeah. If he had distance, like, okay, cool, he's a strong dude, but there are a lot of other people can do that. But why his was impressive is he generated that much force in such a short distance. So force and distance have a very close relationship. And in ballistics, if your force production doesn't fall off, then an increase in distance means an increase in force, because it also means an increase in time. And if you want to get into impulse and all that other stuff, that's going to be another time. That's going to be another conversation. But the idea I promise. The idea is these two things are connected. So if you are bending and your shin is coming forward at the bottom of the swing, then the only way it's ever going to completely open, meaning you're only going to use all of that distance, is if you plantar flex, or if you kind of point your toes toward the floor. I'm not suggesting you leave the floor, but that joint at the ankle needs to completely open for you to have all that distance. And if you leave distance on the table, you're leaving force on the table. So
in order to not leave the floor and get that plantar flex, have that joint open up, you have to lean back through that joint,
through the ankle. Now, when we get into Newton's third law, the whole idea of equal and opposite, the bell is moving forward and away. Okay, it's moving up, up, and forward. Let's say that. So your mass to stay over your base of support, it's completely normal for it to move in the opposite direction, the whole equal and opposite. And that is also increasing the distance between your center of mass and the bell's center of mass. And as you go into pulling the bell back in towards your body, guess what? You've created more distance, and you can turn that distance into force to move the bell back into the backswing, which will make your second swing harder than your first 99.9% of the time. So this idea of leaning back through the ankles gets you more distance, and it allows your joints to fully express their range. When in this post in particular, when I was looking at it, looking at the video, it was very cramped. It was it looked like someone was really doing an unnatural, uncomfortable movement, because
like putting the brakes on, so to speak,
exactly,
or something like that. Yeah.
Perfectly said. He was putting the brakes on, and he wasn't letting his power express itself. And when you look at athletes, real like top tier athletes, they're fluid, they're loose, they're relaxed, even though they're just like tremendously powerful. I mean, you look at, you watch boxing, you watch someone like Mike Tyson be able to coil and uncoil. Like, that guy was not rigid, but he was a beast. And he needed to be able to coil and uncoil with such ferocity to do what he did, but he also needed to be loose at certain points in order to do that. It wasn't just one big, it wasn't just one big force. No, it was a contract, relax, contract, relax, contract, relax. Was that an ear joke? Was that?
Well, it was going to go under the radar until you pointed out. But the contract, relax is essentially the essence of kettlebell training, at least ballistic. Well, actually, with all of it, I would say, and that's what I love about it. And that's like to kind of sum that up. You want to have the ability to express yourself to the fullest without, with using the proper sequence. And when you do that, you're going to get the benefits of what you intend for your training. Now, if you want a weak swing with bad form, then go ahead. But you're not going to like the results. You're going to end up ouchy and cramps, and your body will suck.
If you give yourself a little extra juice, if you push your heels down just a little bit at the top of the swing as you lean, most people have this moment where it's like, oh, they find extra space in their hips. They find a contraction that they couldn't normally have, because one cool thing that happens is as that bell is swinging up with a lot of its momentum, and remember that mass of the bell, because it has the velocity it has, allows you to kind of hang off of it. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's not just that mass, but because that mass is moving at the speed it's moving, it's effectively heavier, right? So you get this, let's say you have like a 28 or a 32 and it's moving forward and you got the handle, you can lean off of this sucker. So if anybody has ever done, let's say, a squat or a hinge with a TRX, where you can move through a greater range of motion because you're holding on to this handle, it's the same thing that happens with a kettlebell. So at that top of that swing, if you can really do a little extra drive through the heels and hang off that bell, you'll find probably a part of your butt you never even knew you should be looking for. Put that on a t-shirt.
Wow. Put that on the t-shirt. All right. I like that. So basically what we're saying is, watch out for the 2-minute tutorial and think that's going to be all your answers. And there's got to be more substance to it. And even though Roger can be annoying with his depth, it's probably worth it to not get annoyed at that and maybe just listen a little bit. And not just Roger. Anybody that's quality out there is going to give you an explanation that's meaningful. And if it's something you want to get good at, for crying out loud, let's get good at it. It's a beauty part about kettlebell training that it invokes skill development, as opposed to just moving through motions to sweat, right? It's going to reap more benefits that way, at least in my personal experience and those who I've worked with. Anything else you got for this one?
I do, actually. I usually don't. Something just occurred to me.
Let's hear it.
I don't want to bash reading the manual. because the manual is there for a reason. It's important. But the manual is a part of the certification process, a part of the teaching process. It is a reminder, is a Cliff Notes reminder, some things that you may want to look out for. Now, are there some things that pretty much all of the major certifications suggest that I think are slightly inaccurate or I don't agree with? Yes. But the overwhelming majority of it I do agree with and I do think is smart. The manual is meant to be in conjunction with lots of hours of practice, a recommendation to read other sources that are more complete. It is a part of a process that includes coaching from someone who has a different perspective, who's gone through this, and this is where your experience can really be valuable. So it's not that the manual is silly. What's silly is you reading the manual and thinking you understand a swing from the manual, or you taking a certification and think you know all there is to know about kettlebells. Because if that were the case, then someone who has their level 1 or even level 2 is as high as they get. And I've been around this long enough to know that there are coaches with layers and layers and layers. And there are others who have their elite and they've done all this stuff. And I was like, you really don't know what you're doing. You're good at doing the stuff, but you can't teach it.
Well, and it's funny you say that because I think the manual is actually misnamed. It's more of like a handbook because manuals imply that this is the tried and true. This is all you need to know. Your car has a manual because it's a machine, and you know that definitively, if you put this fuse in, you're going to fix that light. If you need to connect this to that, this is how we do it. Where the handbook is more of a guide, like you said, it's something worth exploring further into. But again, that could be for another topic. I just think that maybe it's misnamed, and hey,
I'm not going to argue with you. I could, but I won't.
Look, I didn't write the manual and I didn't write the damn handbook. So
either way, even if you go through your automobile analogy, just because you've got the things in the manual or the handbook or whatever you call it, you still don't understand how to fix a car. There's still more to it. You still need to go to a mechanic sometimes.
You got to get under that hood.
Sure.
All right. So get under the hood, everybody, and dive a little deeper into your kettlebell skills. Now, is that it, Coach?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. If you got some value out of this, please be sure to follow, subscribe. And if you want to keep the dialogue going, hey, just lay a comment. We love to, as Roger pointed out at the beginning, we love to talk about it. This is, in fact, what we do all day, every day, except Sundays. All right. And be sure to check out the Bells app at the Apple App Store. And stay strong, everybody.